Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Senate Utilities Committee. It's kind of sparse here today, but we're going to get started, and hopefully everybody will wander in. Today, we've got actually two great presenters on informational hearing on the effects of wind turbine noise on human health. We're actually going to do it in reverse order, and we're going to try to get through the presentations in time so that we have some time for questions. Also, there is a fairly...
Testimony is not up online. There's problems.
Oh, there's some problems with testimony. Okay. Apparently, the online testimony for you folks who are following it, and I think we've had some problems with that all day, because I noticed that in other committees it is not online. I think IT is trying to work on that. But for the committee, there is a paper on wind turbine noise that was authored by both of our presenters today. And we're going to start off actually in reverse order from what you've got on your agenda. We're going to start with Richard James, and he's the owner and principal consultant of Acoustic Solutions. He's been practicing acoustical engineering for 50 years, or almost 50 years. His clients include General Motors, Ford, Goodyear, Tire and Rubber, and many manufacturing facilities. He's also been an adjunct instructor to the Speech and Communication Science Department at Michigan State University, and an adjunct professor for the Department of Communications Disorders at Central Michigan University. And he's served on the Applied Physics Advisory Board of Kettering University. So I want to welcome Richard James to the committee, and we'll start off. And welcome to the committee, Mr. James.
Thank you, Senator Thompson. I appreciate the real kind introduction. And also good afternoon to all of the committee members and ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to go right into the presentation in order to get this going. And I trust that everyone can see the
yes, we can see it looks great, and we can hear you very well.
We're going to make progress then. What I'd like to talk about today is the acoustical end of wind turbine noise. As we heard from Dr. Johnson yesterday, there's a lot of concern about adverse health effects that may not show up right away, plus effects of like sleep disturbance, which are more noticeable. And what I'd like to do today is to explain to you why wind turbine noise is uniquely annoying, as opposed to, let's say, railroad noise, or traffic noise, or airport noise, or most industrial noise. A brief look at how to measure it, and then a closing discussion on how to regulate it. The first point I would like to make, and hopefully this slide is animated on your end, is the reason why wind turbine noise is uniquely annoying is due to these pressure pulsations that we see coming off the blades. If you could see the wind turbine blades when they're turning, they're very similar to what you would see on a prop for a boat. There's a churn that comes out after the wind turbine, or behind the wind turbine blades, or behind the propeller. And this churn then gets churned even more if there's another wind turbine, let's say halfway down the slide. We'd have double churn. Well, those pressure pulsations get translated into things we hear and also things we feel. And I guess to get that through, I have a couple slides from people who are experienced living near wind turbines. The first one's on the audible aspects of wind turbine noise, and the second one is on the infrasound, which is felt more than heard. In fact, very few people could hear it. It's a sensation, or it's a sensation like pressure change on an airplane when you rise or fall, migraines, etc. So let's look at the first slide. This is a family living near 7 wind turbines.
Get up with it every day. You go to work with it every day. I mean, the silence is gone.
And it's forever gone.
Yeah, it's gone.
It's so loud, and it hurts my ears that, I mean, we can't sit outside.
Nobody knows until they live around them.
Yeah,
that you don't know. You might think you know. You might think it's good. And it may be good in certain places, but not around somebody's home.
And then we'll take a look at a family that's living near multiple wind turbines. This is over in Germany, who experience infrasound, which is, like I said, a sound pressure pulse, but it's not audible. It's more palpable in our bodies or in the objects around her. In this case,
Get up with it.
in this case, this particular home resonates to the wind turbine noise, and so it's actually a palpable sensation in the home itself.
Then increase sensitivity to infrasound, an additional burden for residents.
When I was lying in bed, I actually noticed the vibrations on the mattress. I had this strange feeling that something was wrong. Then, in the half light, I clearly saw the mattress move several centimeters. When the buzzing starts, it's like you were in a beehive. You just need to put your hand on the wall of the house and feel the vibrations. When it's really windy, the dog also feels the vibrations. It becomes restless. Then its favorite sleeping spot is in the wardrobe. Even if the door is closed, the dog will open it and climb in. That way, I think it is no longer lying directly on the vibrations.
This particular sense of vibration in objects, I've used a number of times at homes where people have hired me to explain why they're feeling these things. One of the easiest ways to detect infrasound is to know that you'll notice ripples in the surface of a coffee cup or on a bowl of water on the counter. And I have a number of clients who actually have like these Chinese bowls, and they've put just enough water in it so it resonates, and they can tell when the wind turbines start and stop by looking for the ripples. That is how the acoustic wave from infrasound can affect organs in our body, as Dr. Johnson was trying to explain, and as Dr. Punch will explain later. So why are they uniquely annoying? It's because they produce audible pressure pulsations. If wind turbine noise was steady, if it didn't change, it would be a lot less annoying. But what happens, particularly at night when the upper atmosphere gets turbulent, is we get these pulses, a whooshing, thumping, swishing, sometimes even a whistling, and it leads to annoyance, sleep disturbance, and more than anything, like the first family said, a loss of amenity. The sense of being in a rural, quiet area is gone and replaced with the sounds of the wind turbines. Now, wind turbine audible sound can be heard above rural background sounds for about 3/4 to 1 mile. And that's for people with normal hearing. If you have hearing loss, then that isn't going to apply. As for the infrasound pressure pulsations, which are 20 cycles per second or 20 hertz and below, these are felt and not heard. And it's very much like when you can kind of feel your stomach move a little bit when there's thunder in the distance. Thunder is another source of infrasound, and when the lightning cracks, it's a pulse. So it's very similar, except people living near wind turbines get it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And that leads to sensations of dizziness, nausea, tinnitus, migraines, and nystagmus, which is a movement in the eye that's synchronized with the pressure pulses. All of these don't affect everyone. In fact, in the 1980s, the military was looking at infrasound as a weapon. And the reason they dropped it is because so many people that were tested had different reactions. Some got dizzy, some had migraines, others felt organs move, and a whole bunch of people, 80, 90% of them, felt nothing. So it wasn't a good weapon, but it is a huge source of annoyance. And the infrasound travels very far. Again, as thunder, you hear the rumble of thunder long before you hear the crack of thunder when a storm moves in. And you can feel it up to 2 to 5 miles away. And there's been measurements that show you can still detect these pulses out to distances of 10 to 20 miles. When you have a large wind project, it can be even greater than that. So we have pressure pulses. That's why they're uniquely annoying. And it's both in the infrasonic and low frequency range. Now, I'd like to give an example of a sound recording I took in the bedroom of a client. The wind turbines are 1,650 feet away. This is, again, is inside a house, so I'm not sure how it's going to translate through the speakers, but hopefully what we'll hear is a swish, swish, swish that will synchronize with the rise and fall of these sound graphs, or the sound graph. So let's try it and see if we get it.
We couldn't hear that, Rick. Couldn't hear it for some reason. So, yeah.
Well, it is better. It's a sound in a bedroom, so it may be too faint for the speaker systems. But with each of those pulses, we get a whoosh. And if anyone wants to hear it through a headset, they can. I dropped a copy of the show off with Sheila, and they can pick it up and listen to it under more ideal conditions. But anyway, the net result of both of those types of sounds are annoyance. In acoustics, we generally try to limit high annoyance to less than 10%. And that's really because when you have 10% of a population highly annoyed, and highly annoyed means they're motivated to do something about it, not just complain, you've got a political problem and you have a public health problem. Two big studies have shown that wind turbines, and we'll look at the left chart, here's the 10% over on the left-hand corner, very annoyed. The red arrow comes in just above it. And that shows that that wind turbines, when they're 45 dBA LDEN, and that's day, evening, night, it's a special European metric for wind turbines that penalizes nighttime noise. But when it's 45 dBA LDN at night, roughly 10 to 15% of the people are highly annoyed. And what's interesting about this chart is the dashed line represents a railroad shunting yard. And we find that these other lines are traffic, airport, road, and rail, which are way below it in terms of annoyance level. To be annoying there, you'd have to have levels in the 50s to 60s. But at 45 dBA LDN, we have over 10% highly annoyed, and that's almost as many as would be annoyed if they were living near a railroad shunting yard, with all the banging and clanging as cars are hooked up and engines move railroad cars around. Now, this was reconfirmed in 2012 in a study by Health Canada, in which, and I've got to move my picture off so I can see it, in which, again, our 10% line, which is the blue line going across, comes down and shows that when the LEQ, this is the average sound level, not the maximum, but the average sound level is 35 to 40, we'll have 10% highly annoyed. When it's 40 to 46, which is a number that the wind industry is normally reluctant to accept, but happier than 35 to 40, we end up with 13%. And we can see that this is just going up almost exponentially. So we try to limit it to 10% for both health and political reasons. And to do that, we need to keep the sound levels in the 35 to 40. Now, this is an interesting study because the wind industry was a co-sponsor or a stakeholder, in the study. And although the charts and data show this high level of annoyance, and in Canada, high annoyance is considered an adverse health effect, as it is in most other countries, the conclusion of the study was that wind turbines could be as loud as 46 dBA over on the right-hand side before they were a public health problem. So the data in the study doesn't support the conclusions, but you will probably hear the conclusions if the wind industry rebuts or refutes my comments here. So we've known about infrasound from utility scale wind turbines for well over 30 years. Neil Kelly, Dr. Neil Kelly, who worked for the Department of Energy and NASA, was the first to investigate it when complaints came in from some trial wind turbines. And he found that pulsating infrasound, even though it wasn't audible, was perceived by people as far back as 1987. And again, the wind industry participated in these studies, but have never really acknowledged them. In 2009, I did a study with Wade Bray of a Michigan project, 1,300 feet from a wind turbine. And the family in that home sleeps in a sealed cistern in their home basement in order to avoid the pulses and the sounds. In 2012, I had a client in Wisconsin that was called Shirley Wind, and the Public Service Commission authorized the study of the house. We brought in a team of acousticians, highly regarded, both pro-wind and anti-wind and neutral, to do the study. And what the study found was that indeed in the house, there were these vibrations that were being picked up and the audible sound that we saw in the first two slides with the people describing their sensations and experiences. Now, in 2014, as a result of that study, the Brown County Board of Health declared the Shirley Wind utility to be a human health hazard and set the region of impact up to 2.5 miles around the nearest wind turbines. This study was then duplicated in 2015 in Australia by an acoustician, Steve Cooper. He was hired by Pacific Hydro to explain why complaints were coming in from people who were at a great distance from their wind project. And what he found was that he could link the wind turbine infrasound to sensations experienced by the test subjects. And what was even more remarkable is one of the test subjects was functionally deaf, nerve deafness. And that particular test subject was the most accurate at sensing, feeling the wind turbines. The result of this in Shirley Wind is there's now signs like this posted all over the neighborhood. And it doesn't do a lot for the real estate values when people are trying to sell it. Kind of instruments we use are two types. One is a standalone sound level meter like we see on top. An inexpensive meter will not measure these sounds. It takes a professional grade meter. And another approach to it is to use other types of analyzers where the microphone is separated from the analyzer or hooked up to a computer. And both of those are very effective. The second approach, however, is the most effective because you can have multiple microphones and see how the sound varies from outside a house to inside. Or if you hook up a vibration analyzer, how it correlates to vibrations in the walls. Now, how to measure it? The wind industry likes to say this is complicated. Well, it's not complicated. We have an ANSI standard, American National Standards Institute, standard as 12.9 Part 3, which provides a compliance test specifically written for questions about wind turbines. It's applicable to a lot of other noises, but the way it works is shown in this slide over here. And if I start the slide, we'll see this is time going from the left to the right. The wind turbine's on, and then it's turned off, and then it's turned back on. And what we assess the compliance with is the difference between on and off. As long as this difference with the background sound is more than about 5 to 10 decibels, then we know that all of the measurements we see with the wind turbine are wind turbine only. They're not the cars passing by or other sounds in the background. And in this case, 42 dBA from the wind turbines on, the background sound is 25. That's a 17 decibel difference, which would be, as the family in the first set of slides showed, the silence never returns. It's always covered. So the crickets, the sounds of barking dogs in the distance, etc., are masked. And now when they walk outside, they hear wind turbine noise. There's also a standard for measuring background sound that's down here at the thing, specially designed for rural areas that if that becomes a issue, the wind industry likes to say the background sound levels in rural communities are 35 to 45 dBA. That's improperly measured. When measured according to the standard, they'll be down closer to the 25 dBA. So, whoops, didn't mean to do that. get escaped instead of advanced. Okay, the same thing can be done with infrasound. Now this again is a plot showing time. We have from Friday night over on the left side to Saturday noon on the right side. These horizontal lines that we're looking at with the arrows pointing to them are the infrasound from the wind turbines. This is caused by the blade as it passes the tower, and the tower blocks a little bit of the wind, so the blade is coming down, it's bent back with the wind, suddenly it moves in front of the tower and we get a little pressure pulse. When we look at that in a plot, it looks like what we see here, and you can see in the circled area, the wind turbines, some of them actually change speed, and we can assess what the speed is of the turbines from their acoustical fingerprint. Over on the right-hand side, on Saturday morning, the turbines were turned off. And so by comparing what you see on the left side to what you see on the right side, you see the difference between wind turbines running and what would be there if the wind turbine project was either off or had never been installed. And that's a very dramatic difference. As to infrasound pulsations, and this is the Australian study, I can demonstrate how they work by turning this slide on. And it has no audio because infrasound isn't audible. But what we can see here is that all the time people are experiencing this pressure pulse. Just beat, beat, beat as the blades go around and past the tower. And so that's what makes it uniquely annoying. And that is what is necessary to measure it, is to look at these pulsations, not some long-term average. So how do you regulate it? The World Health Organization in 2018 set up some noise guidelines. They've been looking at wind turbine noise since 2009, but this is the most recent. And they said that assuming that for average exposure, wind turbine noise should not exceed 45 dB. And again, that's the LDN. This is again the European method, which penalizes nighttime noise. We translate that to just the US approach, which uses an average over the 24 hours. That would be equivalent to 38 dBA LEQ. LEQ means equivalent or average. Now, the World Health Organization back in 1999 started to look at low frequency noise and made these observations. Low frequency noise can disturb rest and peace even at low sound pressure levels. Where it's the prominent component, then a measure based on A weighting is inappropriate. And that health effects from low frequency components are estimated to be more severe than for other types of community noises. And the higher the proportion of low frequency or infrasound in a noise increases its adverse effects on health. And in 1999, they concluded that the evidence on low frequency noise is sufficiently strong to warrant immediate concern. To update that, Dr. Paul Schomer, who is the Emeritus Director of the Acoustical Society of America Standards Committee, and he helped write many of the standards that we're talking about, used a standard, two standards for land use compatibility between new noise sources and existing communities. His conclusion is that based upon those two standards, which apply to all types of noises, Europe, world, the first one, the second one, ISO standard, is international, and the first one is American, but that 36 to 38 dBA LEQ should be the not to exceed limit. And this matches very closely to what the World Health Organization said. And it supports the concern that we have a not to exceed maximum limit for the pulsations to emphasize to the emitters that it's the pulses we want to limit, not just the average sound level. So how to regulate it? First, by setting a not to exceed sound level of 40 dBA or less. And in the bill that we're talking about, it's 35, so it would be less. And that's described as dBA LF max or fast max. And this is a standard, sound level meters make this measurement very easily. You can measure it for 1 minute, get an L max, 10 minutes, get an L max, an hour and get the L max. but it's all recorded internally, and it's a very simple test when done according to the ANSI standard. The other thing is to address low frequency noise by setting a not to exceed sound level 20 dBA higher than whatever our A-weighted limit is. So if the A-weighted limit was 40, then we set it at 60. Also, and this is probably the most effective regulation, is to have a setback distance from wind turbines of at least 1 mile, or to use the 10x rule. The 10x rule was first developed in Poland, and it eliminates the need to hire acousticians to test things, because if a wind turbine is 10 times its height away from the nearest participating property line, it is very unlikely to be an audible noise problem. It still may be an infrasound problem for a subset of the population. And the second is that you need to have a part of the rule that establishes a funding mechanism for studies and complaints. And typically that's an escrow account to fund independent testings using ANSI. That would also require the operator to cooperate to turn them on and off as needed, and to shut the turbines down until the complaint is resolved. Comments directly on Draft Bill 533, Section 1A, this is the draft that I have, 5,280 foot setback, that's fine. It's supported by research into both infra and low frequency sound. And I would add to the list medical facilities such as hospitals, nursing homes, senior housing, etc., in case such types of facilities are in the wind turbine project. I would hope not. These are the people who are considered more vulnerable, those with senior citizens, people with medical conditions, etc. The other is that a facility should not generate, and it says in the bill, instantaneous. That should probably be replaced with maximum. Instantaneous is just too ambiguous. Maximum is a defined acoustical term, and it's defined as, in your bill, 35 decibels using dBA LF max, measured at the property line with a class 0 sound level meter, following the proper standards. Second comment is that the wind company or the operator needs to be responsible for payment. And my suggestion is that that be a payment put into an escrow account sufficient to fully fund the measurements, and that the applicant or developer shall have no oversight role in the study. And that's because the study needs to be independent, and the funding needs to be there because whoever the acoustical expert is hired, they can't be in a position where payment isn't made for months or years afterwards. With the independent escrow account, they can be paid while everyone argues over the reports. The other is to add that the applicant, developer, operator of the wind project must cooperate with the study. It requires starting and stopping wind turbines. And the third is to consider including requirements similar to commercial air quality permits, such as the current Class 1 operating permit with a 5-year renewal that is in place for Kansas air quality. And I gave a link below that explains that if anyone isn't familiar with it. So anyway, that's the end of my talk. I have a last slide with my qualifications. You can go through that at your leisure. But at this point, I'd basically open it up for any questions, or we can move right on to Dr. Punch's slides.
Thank you, Rick. Actually, I think what we'll do, since there's a lot there, is give us a few minutes for questions and then move on to Dr. Punch. Committee, do you have any questions? I do have one about the L-max, the maximum, the peak noise and stuff like that. Would you use a 1 minute, a 10 minute, 1 hour? What would be the recommendation there in terms of determining what the proper L-max would be?
Well, the ANSI standard that I quoted gives some examples of how to apply it. And one example is that you take an hour's worth of measurements in 10-minute segments. You determine the average level, the L-max, et cetera, for each of the 10-minute segments, and take the highest levels, the highest 10-minute segment for your compliance levels. Sometimes this takes judgment of the acoustician on the ground. As I showed in the slide where we turn them on and turn them off, there's a little bit of time necessary for the wind turbine noise to settle down. It can, with a big project, it can take 5 to 10 minutes before the noise completely disappears. So 10 minutes, 6 10-minute increments, each looked at individually, gives time for the wind turbine noise to die down, and at the end for them to be turned back on with some good sampling in the middle. I hope that helps.
That does help. One other quick question, and I've got another question from Senator Francisco. What would be just a rough estimate of an average cost for a study like this?
That really depends on, I mean, if we knew that we could, if you had a local acoustician, you didn't have to pay for travel. Travel is the biggest problem, and there aren't a lot of acousticians in Kansas or actually in any of the Plain states. They're mostly situated up here in the Midwest with heavy industry out in the East Coast and West Coast. But assuming that there was a local acoustician who could do it, it would probably be a night-long study with 4 or 5 days for analysis and reports. So probably something in the $5,000 to $10,000 price range.
Okay. Senator Francisco?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is the noise from a turbine increased if blades have been damaged?
Absolutely. That's why I put in whistling. I had a client once talk to me about his strong desire to take a shotgun and shoot the blades. And I told him that was the last thing he wanted to do, because if he got a hole in the blades, then he's going to get a whistle. And instead of whoosh, 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 it'll be. And because the company will assume someone did it purposely, there's not going to be a lot of incentive for them to fix it quickly. I've seen whistling occur when something as small as a piece of tape that was sealing a joint on a blade comes loose. It's an ongoing maintenance problem with the blades. When there's snow, if you have any ice that builds up on the blades, that can cause whistling. Just about anything that affects the aerodynamics of the air flowing over the blade leads to either increased whooshing, swishing, or whistling. And then we can assume that as they age, that will continue. Like a car, a brand new car doesn't have any rattles. A 10-year-old car is going to have a lot more rattles. A 10-year-old wind project will have a lot more noise.
Thank you, Rick. I think what we need to do, in interest of time, is to move on to Dr. Punch's presentation. And Dr. Punch, we can give you about 15 minutes, so we have a little time for questions after that. Thank you very much, Rick, for your presentation. We appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Dr. Punch, you are up, sir. And by the way, the presentations are now up online if you want to look at them on your computer.
Okay, are you hearing me and seeing me?
We've got you 100%. Thank you, sir.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I know Rick has shared a lot of information. I'll be reinforcing some of that and adding a few new twists, I hope. So I have quite a few slides, and I'll try not to talk too fast. Rather, I'll try to just allude to the slides temporarily. That is, just tell you what they say rather than exactly having myself repeat them. So my topic I've selected here is I chose to call it effects of wind turbine noise and on human health. I'm moving my screen around a little bit so I can see my own slides here.
Yeah, it looks fine here on our end.
You're just seeing the slide. Okay, good. Let me tell you first about my earliest experience with wind turbine noise. I think it was around 2009 when Rick James invited me to visit a family of 4 in Huron County, which is the thumb of Michigan, where they were leaving their home at night to sleep in a motel when turbines were operating. There were multiple turbines. I can't recall the number. There was at least 6 or 8 surrounding the property, the nearest one of which was 1,300 feet away from the property in the backyard, near the backyard. I could hear, I went with an inquisitive mind. I had no opinions about what I might experience at all. Sitting in the backyard, I could hear, obviously, the periodic whooshing noises from several turbines, it seemed. And inside the house, I viewed the water rippling in a bowl, as Rick alluded to earlier. I felt some momentary mild sensations while they were operating. But to be honest, I left the home feeling very skeptical that noise from wind turbines could cause serious sleep problems. So I came home and in terms of my experiences after that, I'm sorry, I'm having trouble with my extra. Okay, I've got it now. Thank you. Are you okay now on your end?
Yeah, we're still fine. We're
okay,
still
good.
Fine,
That's where it ought
yep.
to be. That's where it ought to be. I did a literature review. I first read a book by Paul Geip, Wind Energy Comes of Age, and it gave a pretty positive outlook on the future of wind energy. I thought, well, that doesn't jive with what I'm now seeing on the internet about all the complaints of wind turbine noises. I did a initial literature review and ended up publishing an article in Audiology Today, co-authoring an article with Rick and one of my students who's an engineer student. And I was invited to do a 3-part blog on the internet, and subsequently Rick and I wrote this paper, which was a comprehensive review article on the effects of wind turbine noise on human health. I was asked to chair a technical work group in the state of Michigan to revise the siting guidelines for onshore wind turbines in the state. I don't have time to go into that, but if you have questions, we can talk about that maybe. I was asked to serve as an expert witness in legal actions in about 11 states, some states multiple cases. And several of those have involved interviewing residents who were affected by the turbines, particularly with respect to the noise. My current view is that noise from large turbines causes annoyance. It causes a variety of sensations and adverse health effects in a substantial number of people who are exposed to the noise. My view is, I think, best described as not as being pro-wind or anti-wind, but simply pro-health. We simply have to take care of people. Okay. Every time I change slides, I'm having a little problem with this other screen. It keeps popping up.
Yeah, it looks fine on this end.
Okay.
Yeah, it sure does.
I'll proceed. Okay, so when Rick and I wrote the article, what we were trying to do is take the talking points. We selected 12 major talking points of the wind industry and tried to refute those. So we refuted them in what we call statements 1 through 12. Today, what I want to do is simply take you through. Rick's the engineer. He didn't have this problem. Okay. I'm not going to read these points. These are the points we tried to refute. We reviewed quite a body of literature. The article turned out to be about 55 pages, very long article, with about 15 pages or so of references. So I'm not going to try to give you a literature review today. I'm just going to try to make some major points. For example, setback distance number 4, setback distances of 1,000 to 1,500 feet are sufficiently safe to keep people from being harmed. We turned that around a little bit and took the opposite point of view and gave literature, talked about literature which refuted that point. Number 8, for example, wind turbine noise has not been accepted as a diagnostic entity by the medical profession, so medical professionals can't really diagnose or even treat it. So I'll let you read through those at your leisure and move on to the next slide. My first assertion, and I'll call these assertions as opposed to statements, these are what we believe, these statements are what I believe to be true. And Rick has talked about this already, but let me go through this quickly. Wind turbine noise is unique among industrial noises that are known to cause or lead to high annoyance and adverse health effects. Rick talked about the amplitude modulation or the whooshing noise. Wind turbine noise is impulsive. It can produce tones from the blades and various equipment, as well as the blade turning. The perception of wind turbine noise depends on the distance, the wind direction, and the terrain, where hilly terrain tends to produce even worse perceptions of the noise. It's unpredictable and uncontrollable by receptors or people who live in their homes. It occurs most often against a background level against the low background levels that are common in rural areas, which causes, of course, sleep disturbance. It easily crosses property lines and penetrates homes and barriers. People have tried to sleep in their basements. They've tried to move mattresses against the walls in their basements, and typically that becomes a burden that they can't bear very long, and it just simply does not work for most people. And taken together, these characteristics make wind turbine noise unique among various kinds of industrial noises and transportation noises. The range of hearing spans from 0 hertz or about 1 hertz or less to 20,000 hertz. Below 20 hertz, we call that infrasound. We really can't hear it as sound. And above 20,000 hertz, ultrasound. 20 to 20,000 hertz is commonly cited as the range of human hearing. Infrasound can be picked up as vibrations or sensations because of the vibration of bodily tissues and organs. It can be worse in homes, particularly the very lowest portions of the spectrum. In this slide, we're just showing infrasound from, we're showing sound from 0 to 1,000 hertz. So it's a fairly low to middle frequency range. But infrasound is indicated in the lower, as you can see, the lower left arrow, 0 to 20 hertz. The importance of sound above frequencies above 200 hertz is that speech occurs in this range. About 20 hertz, 200 hertz to approximately, and this is debatable, but if you can hear well between 200 hertz and about 6,000 hertz, you hear speech very, very well. Appreciation of music is best when your hearing is good, even beyond 6,000 hertz. And here you can see in the very lowest frequencies, this is the graph itself, the green, and I'm colorblind, so I think this is a green line showing the outdoor frequency spectrum versus the indoor, the blue line. At frequencies below about 0.3 or 0.2, around 0.2 to 0.1 hertz, very, very low frequencies. The sound, that is, the intensity is higher on the inside of say a house, a residency, than on the outside. And so that does account, I think, for the fact that we see from the 1980s studies showing that some people experience wind turbine noise, particularly the infrasound, worse when inside the home rather than outside. But in the end, some people go outside to get away from it. Some people go inside to get away from it, depending on whether the infrasound or the audible sound is the problem. Assertion 2 is a very simple one. Annoyance is an adverse health effect. That's according to the WHO, the World Health Organization, the Environmental Protection Agency, and Health Canada. Health Canada says it considers high annoyance to be an indirect, at least an indirect adverse health effect. And I think I recall Dr. Johnson making that point yesterday. Assertion 3.3, many adverse health effects have been associated with audible and inaudible noise. Of course, sleep disturbance, there's no question that sleep disturbance is the most common complaint. Pressure pulses at the infrasonic rates that Stephen Cooper in Australia have talked about. have been linked directly to negative sensations and adverse health effects. This is a long list, and of course I'm not going to read the symptoms, but these are documented in the literature, anecdotally, and in the scientific literature. At the bottom, I put a question mark beside blurred vision because it's just coming to light that that may be a problem in some people, and it may be related to the nystagmus issue that the eye movement issue that Rick talked about a little earlier. The wind industry argues that medical people can't diagnose or treat wind turbine syndrome as was mentioned first by Pierpont in 2009, because it's not been accepted diagnostically in the medical profession. You all have probably heard of ICD codes, International Classification of Diseases. They're used for the purposes of tracking medical conditions of people and population, individuals and populations. And of course are used for billing purposes as well in our country and others. And although there's no ICD code specifically for wind turbine syndrome, in our paper in 2016, we identified 7. Now there are, I think, 8 out of the 10 conditions that Pierpont included in her wind turbine syndrome that do exist as ICD codes. So the individual components exist, many of the components. And recently, a new code was added to identify vertigo from infrasound, not mentioning wind turbines per se, but at least we're beginning to recognize that infrasound can lead to vertigo, which is one major symptom that people suffer from when exposed to wind turbine noise. The effects of audible and inaudible sound on health are demonstrated here. The solid lines are direct causes, and the dashed lines are treated as indirect, or thought to be indirect links. So infrasound and audible sound can directly affect sleep. Annoyance can affect sleep, obviously. Sleep disturbance can obviously also lead to health effects. And I think, and this is the one I added, the dash line here, if you have serious health effects, that certainly can lead to additional sleep problems. So you can see an example here, and I've indicated here that stress is often a mediator between the stimulus and the response, the cause and effect. These are the 10 conditions or symptoms that Pierpont included in her wind turbine syndrome criteria. These data came from a family which I interviewed, who we asked to complete a very long questionnaire. Actually, these data are from one individual, adult male. He exhibited 7 of the 10 symptoms of so-called wind turbine syndrome. In another state, we interviewed, actually this is Michigan, we interviewed a family of 3 with a son, I think a preteen son. You can see, I won't count them, you can count them if you want, but multiple symptoms in each person. The only pre-existing symptom that we noticed was a hearing and ear problem, having the father had previous ear surgery, and the mother had one of the conditions, which I can't recall at the moment. I'm sure Rick probably remembers. But the point is, I think wind turbine syndrome is real in the sense that people who are exposed to wind turbines can experience any number of these symptoms. Most people, I think, don't necessarily experience this many symptoms, but I was very surprised to see this was happening in a family. They had just modified, upgraded their home, and were looking at a big picture window, A-frame window, at a large turbine across the way, and that bothered them. But the noise was really what kind of drove them crazy. And they went to a second home, which they owned about 20 miles away, a cabin, I think, in Michigan, to get away from the turbines when they needed to.
Dr. Punch, I think we're running short enough on time. I We've got all of your
Wow.
information here, so I would urge the committee to look through the rest, but I wanted to allow a little bit of time for anybody to ask questions if we could before
Of
our
course.
time runs out. And first of all, I appreciate all the study you've done. And just to reiterate to the committee, there's a copy of the actual study from Dr. Punch and Richard James also there. So committee, I want to open up to any questions you might have for Dr. Punch. I do have a quick question myself, and that would be, what are other states doing with regard to setbacks and sound, and maybe states or localities doing with regard to setbacks and sound standards and requirements to help protect people's health?
Well, I did have a slide later that says, that indicates setbacks are really all over the place in terms of what's happening in various places and localities, counties and so forth. Setbacks are ranging from anywhere around 1,000 feet or so to maybe 1.5 miles and even more in other countries particularly. I'm sure Rick has more information on this than I do. I was making the point that it's better to set a noise standard than a setback level, particularly if we're going to be using the short setback distances that are being used, less than 1 mile, 1,500 feet, for example. But there, I looked at a website some time ago, and there's, the data are all over the place. So there's no standard. I don't know if you can get Rick back to comment on this or not, but I'd like to hear from Rick on that.
Yeah, I think Rick, are you still on the line?
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. The answer to that question is in the United States, the U.S., the federal government turned this responsibility over to each state. In most other countries, it's a federal thing. But in the U.S., we have a number of states, California, Massachusetts, New York, Maine, that have their own noise standards. But these were written for general industry noise, traffic noise, etc. And they don't address the problem of the modulation. But if we look at other countries, for example, all of Canada has a standard of 40 dBA average, LEQ. And yet, even though all of the wind projects have been built to that standard, we participated in a paper on abandoned homes, and there's hundreds of homes in Ontario that have been abandoned, just as there are here in the United States, even though their standard is at 40 average. Now, Europe, Germany is a good example. They're 35 dBA at the home. Australia and New Zealand, et cetera, are all about 40 dBA. So the general trend I see is that most standards that were set by governments, where there were experts on the panel, et cetera, tend to be 40 dBA or lower. Whereas in the US, it depends upon who got to the government first. Your standard will be one of the few state standards that directly address wind turbine noise, and I think that's necessary. Most of the other standards are for general noise, and they are not sufficiently protective for these pulses and the whooshes and the fact that wind turbines, if you go out in the daytime to listen to wind turbines, they're going to be quiet. It's very seldom are they noisy in the daytime because of the way the air and the atmosphere acts. It's nighttime when people are trying to sleep that the problem occurs. And you see that in a lot of the international standards. They'll have tighter standards for night than they do for the daytime. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, and typically at night you have a stronger temperature inversion that develops and that channels the sound, correct?
Oh yes, I'm talking to a meteorologist. That's correct.
I've studied a little bit on that.
This is the problem. Most of us don't understand that 30 feet above us, the atmosphere is entirely different than what we experience in the bottom 30 feet. One of the wind company's standard things is, well, you'll never hear a wind turbine because the wind noise and leaf rustle will mask it. But literally 1/3 of all the nights, you have a temperature inversion. It'll be absolutely calm on the ground, but if you look up at the treetops, they're swishing. And if you look up the wind turbines, they're operating at full power. So this idea that wind noise masks wind turbines is only true if you don't know that there's many nights when they will be operating, but there will be nothing on the ground to mask them. So when you hear the rebuttals, you'll probably hear a lot of this stuff come back from a different angle. I just wanted to kind of alert you to this one. Wind turbine noise in the daytime is not a problem. Actually, let me give you one more. One of the slides I didn't show is a salesperson from a wind company up near the base of a wind turbine talking about how you can barely hear it. That is actually a trick, because wind turbine noise is projected outward far over that point. But the other is, all you have to do is feather the blades a little bit, and that noise goes away. Now, why don't they do that at night? It's because when they feather the blades, they don't generate power. So in order to generate power, they have to have the blades set to dig in, and that's where the problem comes in. And it's entirely under the control of the operator and the operator's software. But what I've seen is they have much more of a problem at night, early morning, than they do during the daytime.
I've got time for one really quick question from Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was wondering if either of you could comment on any reductions in noise that can be gained through insulation of a home?
Yeah, this is an acoustical question. Because the homes are built to block out the kind of noises we're used to, like traffic noise, the sound of people playing outside, the walls are not effective at blocking out low frequency noise, which is why you may hear a truck rumble when it goes by, but you don't hear the cars when they pass by. Because of that, homes are not able to provide much protection against the low frequencies. And the kind of changes you have to make to a home to make them protected for low frequency can't be retrofit with anything. If you're building a home near an airport, you can put in the acoustical windows, the acoustical walls, and all the other things, but you can't retrofit a home easily to do that. So the very nature of how we design homes in quiet rural communities works against the homeowner when it comes to this type of noise. It's something that really can't be mitigated. There are ways to mitigate it from the wind company, but it would mean that they take major reductions in the amount of energy they produce, or if they use one of the new quieter wind turbines, they would just produce less electricity or less power all the time. So the options that seem to have been larger wind turbines, more power, and we run them full out all the time.
We are out of time. Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Dr. Punch. We appreciate the very informative presentations today, and hopefully that helps to edify the committee as we go forward and working these bills coming up. Appreciate your time, committee. We will be hearing Senate Bill 353 tomorrow, and with that, we are adjourned.
Thank you.